Let's play a little word association. I say, the Puritans. What comes to mind? Probably a very specific image. Stern-faced men and women, dressed head tudo in black, with big hats and even bigger buckles. You probably think of a joyless, pleasure-hating society. People who banned Christmas, hated fun, and spent their time judging their neighbors. And, of course, you think of witches. The Salem witch trials, a moment of religious hysteria that has defined them for centuries. This is the Puritan of pop culture, the villain from The Scarlet Letter and The Crucible. They are the black and white caricature of American origins. The stuffy, repressive ancestors we had to overcome to become the vibrant, free society we are today. But what if almost everything you just pictured is wrong? What if I told you the Puritans didn't just wear black, but loved vibrant colors? That they drank beer, celebrated with feasts, and wrote about the importance of a joyful sex life in marriage? And what if I told you that far from being just stuffy traditionalists, these people were radical, dangerous rebels? That their journey to America was a revolutionary act, and that their radical ideas about God and government planted the seeds that would eventually blossom into the American Revolution. Today, we are going to tear down the caricature and meet the real Puritans. And we'll ask the question, were these history's ultimate killjoys, or were they, in fact, America's first rebels? Title card typography that looks like it's carved from wood, set against a backdrop that transitions from a gloomy, stereotypical Puritan village to a more historically accurate and colorful one. The real Puritans, were they actually America's first rebels? Before we meet the real Puritans, let's spend a moment with the caricature, because it's so powerful. We see them as the embodiment of religious intolerance. A people so rigid, they created a society where a young woman could be forced to wear a scarlet A for adultery, and where neighbors turned on neighbors, accusing them of witchcraft in a fit of deadly paranoia. They are the no-fun police of history. The people who, according to the writer H.L. Mencken, were consumed by the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, may be happy. This image is easy to dislike. It's the perfect historical villain. But this image is a distortion, created by later generations to define what they were not. To understand who the Puritans really were, we have to go back to where they began. Not in America, but in England. And we have to understand that the name Puritan was originally an insult. They didn't call themselves Puritans. The name was hurled at them in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. They were a group of radical Protestants who believed that the Protestant Reformation in England hadn't gone far enough. The Church of England, they argued, was still too popish, too full of Catholic rituals, vestments, and hierarchy. They wanted to purify the church, to strip it down to its bare biblical essentials. This wasn't just a theological disagreement. This was a direct challenge to the authority of the state, because in England, the king was the head of the church. To challenge the church was to challenge the king. It was treasonous. It was rebellious. They were harassed, fined, and imprisoned for their beliefs. They were a persecuted minority. So, a small group of them, known as the Separatists, made a radical decision. They decided to leave England entirely, first for Holland, and then for the uncertainties of the New World. Think about what this meant. In an age of kings and bishops, they rejected both. They were not sailing to America to build a New England. They were trying to build a New Jerusalem, a society based on a direct covenant with God, far from the corrupting influence of the old world. This was not the act of conservatives trying to preserve a tradition. This was the act of radicals trying to build a utopia from scratch. This was an act of rebellion. Now, let's tackle those stereotypes head-on. First, the black clothes. This is almost entirely a 19th century invention. While Puritans did wear black for formal occasions, like today, their daily life was colorful. Inventories of their estates list clothes of red, blue, green, and yellow. They were weavers and dyers who appreciated color. The idea of a drab, black-clad society is a myth. Next, the idea that they were joyless and pleasure-hating. This is a profound misunderstanding of their theology. The Puritans didn't hate pleasure. They hated pleasure that was disconnected from God. They believed the world and its joys, food, drink, family, nature were gifts from God, to be enjoyed thankfully. They were not teetotalers. They drank beer and ale as a staple of their diet. The first building constructed by the Pilgrims at Plymouth after their common house, a brewery. What they condemned was drunkenness, losing control of your God-given reason. And far from being prudish about sex, they saw it as a crucial part of a healthy marriage. While they strictly forbade sex outside of marriage, within it, they saw it as a gift from God, meant for both procreation and for pleasure and bonding between a husband and wife. There are Puritan letters and sermons that speak of the importance of mutual sexual satisfaction in a way that would seem surprisingly modern. They weren't against fun. They were against the kinds of fun they saw as idolatrous or pagan. Yes, they discouraged the celebration of Christmas, but not because they hated joy. It was because they couldn't find it commanded in the Bible. And they saw the holiday as it was celebrated in England, a drunken, chaotic festival, as a pagan disgrace. They had their own celebrations, like days of Thanksgiving, which involved feasting and community gathering. Now, we cannot talk about the Puritans without talking about their dark side, and their intolerance was very, very real. Having escaped persecution themselves, they ironically did not extend that same freedom to others in their own colony. They banished dissenters like Roger Williams, who argued for the separation of church and state, and Anne Hutchinson, a brilliant woman who challenged the religious authority of the male leadership. In their view, these individuals weren't just disagreeing. They were threatening the very foundation of their holy experiment. They feared that dissent would invite God's wrath and cause their society to collapse. And then, there is Salem. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are a permanent stain on their legacy. Over several months, a toxic storm of local rivalries, anxieties, and genuine belief in the supernatural erupted into a full-blown panic. 19 innocent people were executed for witchcraft. It's crucial to understand that the Puritans didn't invent the belief in witches. It was widespread across Europe at the time, but the events at Salem were an extreme and tragic episode where their intense fear, their rigid worldview, and their lack of due process led to horrific injustice. It was a failure of the very community they sought to build. Interestingly, it was also mainstream Puritan leaders from Boston who eventually stepped in and condemned the trials. Recognizing they had gone terribly wrong, their intolerance and the tragedy of Salem came from the same source as their rebellion. It was born of a zealous, all-consuming conviction that they were on a divine mission. This zeal gave them the courage to defy a king and cross an ocean. But it also made them fear and violently reject anything that threatened their fragile new world. So, were the Puritans villains or rebels? The truth is, they were both. They were complex, contradictory human beings. They were intolerant authoritarians who created a society with strict moral codes. But they were also foundational rebels whose ideas were genuinely revolutionary. Think about it, they established communities based on written covenants, like the Mayflower Compact. This was a radical idea, that a government's authority comes not from a king or a bishop, but from a mutual agreement among the people themselves. They championed education, founding Harvard College just 6 years after arriving, because they believed everyone needed to be able to read the Bible for themselves, not just listen to a priest. This created one of the most literate societies in the world. Their system of congregational churches, where each church governed itself, was a training ground for some. These ideas, government by consent, the importance of a literate citizenry, and the practice of self-governance would simmer in New England for over a century, and they would eventually boil over into the American Revolution. The spirit of 1776, the spirit of challenging a distant, unjust authority, owed a profound and often unacknowledged debt to the spirit of the Puritans who first defied a king for the sake of their convictions. So the caricature of the stuffy, boring Puritan in black is not just wrong, it misses the entire point. They were not boring. They were passionate, zealous, and revolutionary. They were flawed architects of a new world, and their complicated legacy is woven directly into the fabric of America. What do you think? After hearing this, should we see the Puritans primarily as intolerant witch hunters, or as the radical rebels who laid the groundwork for American liberty? Let me know your perspective in the comments below. If you enjoyed re-examining this crucial piece of American history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives that challenge what we think we know about the past. Thanks for watching.